Welcome, my strange and curious friends, to Bernette's Bizarre but True Tales, where history opens the creaking door, folklore steps inside, and the truth waits in the shadows. Tonight, we follow the trail of a man who may have outrun time itself, from the glittering courts of Europe to the gaslit streets of New Orleans. New Orleans does not bury its secrets. It cannot. The water table is too high. The earth is too soft. If you dig just a few feet into the dark Mississippi mud, the past bleeds through. So the city builds upwards. It stacks its dead in stone tombs above the soil, creating cities of the dead that watch over the living. And its secrets, they walk the streets. They hide behind the intricate iron links of French Quarter balconies. They linger in the heavy, humid air that smells of jasmine, river rot, and old stones. Most cities use history to understand where they have been. New Orleans uses history as a neighbor. If you walk down Royal Street, past the antique shops and the street musicians playing jazz that sounds like a beautiful bruise, you will find the intersection of Royal and Ursulines. There stands a house, 3 stories of weather-beaten brick and dark green shutters. It looks like a dozen other Creole townhouses in the quarter. But if you stand outside it long enough, as the twilight turns the sky to chill, a sudden sharp drop in temperature that has nothing to do with the breeze from the river. In the winter of 1902, the lamps inside that house were lit for the first time in years. The man who moved in was wealthy, charming, and possessed an elegance that felt unanchored by time. He called himself Jacques St. Germain. But to understand the terror he would unleash on the French Quarter, we have to look back further. We have to travel across an ocean and across 2 centuries to a man who claimed he could never die. The year is 1748. The court of King Louis XV at Versailles is a place of dizzying opulence, blinding silks, and whispers. It is a world obsessed with youth, beauty, and the pursuit of the impossible. Alchemists and mystics lined the corridors, promising the king everything from fool's gold to eternal life. But none of them captured the court's imagination quite like the man who arrived that winter. He was known as Comte de Saint Germain. No one knew where he came from. Some said he was the displaced son of the Transylvanian prince. Others whispered he was an Italian nobleman who had stumbled upon the great secret of the universe. He was a master of languages, speaking French, English, German, Italian, Spanish, Arabic, and Sanskrit with no traceable accent. He was a virtuoso on the violin. He was an expert chemist who could remove flaws from diamonds with a closely guarded chemical wash. But it was his face that unnerved people. He appeared to be a man of roughly 45 years old. He had dark hair, piercing eyes, and an effortless grace. The trouble was, people who had been alive 50 years prior swore he looked exactly the same back then. The old Comtesse de Gergy met him at a party in Versailles and stared at him in disbelief. She approached him and asked if his father had been in Venice in the year 1710. The Comte smiled. "No, madame," he replied. "I myself was in Venice in 1710. I had the pleasure of knowing you then." You were very beautiful." She gasped. "But that is impossible. The man I knew then was at least 45 years old, and you look no older today." Saint Germain simply bowed. "I am very old, madame," he whispered. The rumors spread like wildflower to the French court. The Comte was a man who possessed the elixir of life. He was a master alchemist who had unlocked the secret to halting time itself. But there was another detail, a detail that went largely unremarked upon amidst the glamour of Versailles, but one that would take on a terrifying significance 2 centuries later. The Comte hosted the most magnificent dinners in Paris. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, rich pastries, and the finest wines. He would sit at the head of the table, captivating the room with stories. He spoke of the Queen of Sheba as if they had shared tea. He described the execution of Mary, the Queen of Scots, with the vivid detail of an eyewitness. Yet during these multi-course feasts, his urn plate remained utterly empty. For he never ate, not a crumb of bread, not a piece of fruit. When his host pressed him, he would gracefully decline, claiming he possessed a delicate constitution and survived entirely on proprietary blend of oatmeal, pods, and white chicken meat cooked in his private quarters. But observers noticed that while his plate was bare, his glass was never empty. He drank a deep, dark, vicious red liquid. He claimed it was a rare vintage. Then, just as quickly as he had arrived, the Comte vanished. Over the next 100 years, sightings of him popped up like ghosts across Europe. He was seen in Prussia with Frederick the Great. He was seen in Russia during the coup of Catherine the Great. In 1821, a French writer wrote that she saw him in Paris, looking not a day older than he had in 1748. The official records say the Comte died in Germany in 1784, but those who knew him laughed at the paperwork. You cannot bury a man who has outlived the concept of the grave. So let us move forward in time. Let us cross the Atlantic, riding the waves of the 19th century to the dawn of the 20th century, New Orleans, 1902. The city is a cauldron of cultures. The old Creole aristocracy is clinging to its traditions, while the American sector expands. Ragtime music is beginning to bleed out of the bottles of Storyville, and the French Quarter is a place of fading grandeur. It is into this world that a man named Jacques St. Germain stepped off a steamship. He is wealthy, immensely so. He buys the property at 1041 Royal Street with cash. He fills it with heavy European furniture, velvet drapes that block out the fierce Louisiana sun, and an impressive collection of art. It does not take long for New Orleans high society to notice him. He is handsome, independently wealthy, and speaks with a refined European accent. He introduces himself as a descendant of the famous Comte de Saint Germain. And the city's elite are charmed. They invite him to their parlors, and soon Jacques is hosting his own gatherings at the Royal Street House. To enter Jacques St. Germain's home was to step into another era. The rooms were lit entirely by candlelight. He refused the new electric lighting that was becoming fashionable. The scent of expensive French perfume mingled with the heavy smell of the river. His parties became legendary. He spared no expense. He hired the best caterers in the city. He served truffles, caviar, and champagne that flowed like water. But just like his alleged ancestor in Versailles, Jacques St. Germain never ate. At one party, a prominent local doctor named Marcus Carter noticed this curiosity. Dr. Carter watched as Jacques walked among his guests, laughing, pouring wine, and telling stories. But whenever a servant offered him a tray of hors d'oeuvres, Jacques would wave it away with a practiced, elegant gesture. "I have a digestive ailment," Jacques told Dr. Carter when pressed. "The legacy of a youth spent in warmer climates. My stomach handles only liquids these days." Dr. Carter looked at the man's complexion. Jacques did not look sick. His skin was pale, yes, but smooth and unblemished. His teeth and smile were remarkably white and sharp. And then there were the stories Jacques would talk about, the court of Louis XV. He didn't speak of it like a historian who had read books. He spoke of it like a man who remembered the draftiness of the halls. He described the perfume the king wore. He talked about the sound of the rain against the stained glass of Versailles. "You talk about the past as if you were there," Monsieur Saint Germain, one of the female guests, remarked, laughing behind her fan. Jacques paused. The candlelight caught his eyes, turning them into cold, dark discs. "Perhaps I was, madame," he said softly. "The world is very small when you have lived in it long enough." The guests laughed, assuming it was an eccentric wit of a wealthy European. They drank his wine, they enjoyed his hospitality, they went home to their beds, leaving Jacques alone in the candlelit dark of Royal Street. But as the weeks grew into months, a subtle shift occurred in the quarter. People began to notice that Jacques St. Germain was never seen during the day. His shutters remained tightly closed against the morning sun. He only emerged after twilight, walking the cobblestones with a silver-tipped cane. Young women, often working girls from the edges of the Storyville, or travelers staying in the local boarding houses, began to whisper about a man who stalked the shadows of the quarter, a man who would offer them gold coins to accompany him to his home, only to exhibit bizarre and aggressive behavior once the doors were closed. But in 1902, the disappearance of women on the margins of society rarely made the front page of the Times Democrat. The police turned a blind eye. The wealthy elite continued to attend Jacques' parties until a warm night in December, when the illusion was shattered by a scream that echoed down Royal Street. It was just past midnight. The French Quarter was quiet, save for the distant drunken laughter from Bourbon Street. Suddenly, a shattering sound broke the peace. A heavy glass window pane on the second floor of 1041 Royal Street exploded outward. A young woman tumbled through the frame. She fell onto the wooden floor of the second-story balcony, screaming, her nightgown torn and stained with dark fluid. Below, a local watchman named Charles Landry was walking his beat. He heard the glass break, looked up, and saw the woman scrambling toward the iron railing. She looked behind her into the dark room with absolute horror, as if something was reaching out from the shadows to pull her back. Before the entity in the room could grab her, the woman climbed over the iron railing and threw herself into the street below. Landry rushed forward. The woman was alive, but her legs were broken from the fall. She was shivering violently despite the mild winter air. Landry knelt beside her, pulling his coat over her shoulders. "What happened?" Landry demanded. "Who did this to you?" The woman couldn't barely speak. She was in shock, her eyes wide and wild. She clutched Landry's lapels with bleeding hands. "The master of the house! she choked out. Saint Germain, he bit me. Landry looked down at her neck. Through the tears in her collar, he saw a jagged, bubbly wound on her jugular vein. It wasn't a knife wound. It wasn't a tear from a broken piece of glass. It was a cluster of deep puncture marks pouring blood onto her collarbone. She told Landry that Saint Germain had brought her to the house under the pretense of a job. But once inside, his demeanor changed. He didn't touch her like a man seeking lust. He pinned her to the floor with a strength that felt like iron machinery. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her throat. And then, she said, he drank from her. She had managed to grab a heavy silver candlestick from a table, striking him across the face with enough force to stun him. In her desperation, she had thrown herself through the window. Landry blew his whistle, summoning more officers to the scene. Within minutes, a small crowd of neighbors and police had gathered outside 1041 Royal Street. The police banged on the heavy oak front door. "Open the door, this is the police." No answer. The house was pitch black. The lamps that usually burned so bright were dead. The captain of the precinct, hesitant to break into the home of a wealthy, influential citizen without a warrant, decided to wait until morning. They took the bleeding woman to the charity hospital and posted 2 guards outside the house. They thought they had him trapped. They thought a wealthy gentleman would have nowhere to run in a city surrounded by swamps. They were wrong. The next morning, with proper authorizations in hand, the police forced their way through the front door. The air inside the house was cold and heavy. It smelled of copper and stale perfume. They searched the ground floor. Everything was in perfect order. The expensive carpets, the velvet chairs, the antique paintings. Then they went up the stairs to the second floor, into the room where the window had been shattered. The room was a crime scene. A puddle of blood stained the hardwood floor where the woman had been attacked. The silver candlestick she had used to defend herself lay nearby, tarnished with a smear of dark skin and hair. But it was what they didn't find that began to unravel the minds of the investigators. They searched the kitchen in a city known for its culinary indulgence. The kitchen of Jacques St. Germain was a tomb. There was no flour, there was no sugar, there was no vegetables, no meat, no bread. There was no pots or pans on the stove. There were no forks, knives, or spoons in the drawers. The man who hosted the most lavish dinner parties in New Orleans did not possess a single utensil to feed himself. But then an officer opened the large wine cellar in the back of the house. Racks upon racks of dark green bottles lined the stone walls, hundreds of them. The police thought they had found his vice. The captain pulled a bottle from the rack and wiped the dust from the glass. The labels was all written in an elegant, archaic French script. He pulled the cork. The scent that filled the room was not the sweet, fermented aroma of a fine Bordeaux. It was the thick, iron stank of an open wound. The captain poured a drop of the liquid onto his finger. It was too thick to be wine. It was dark, coagulated, and crimson. The police opened another bottle, then another, then dozens more. Every single bottle in the cellar was filled with the same substance of horrific mixture of red wine and human blood. Jacques St. Germain was gone. The guards, posted outside the house, swore no one had left through the front or back doors. Yet the house was empty. He had vanished into the humid New Orleans night leaving behind his clothes, his furniture, his fortune, and his cellar of horrors. The police report from that morning in December 1902 was quietly filed away. The city's elite, embarrassed by how easily they had been deceived, stopped talking about Jacques St. Germain. The house at 1041 Royal Street was eventually sold, its contents auctioned off to buyers who didn't ask too many questions about where the furniture came from. But folklore is more resilient than a police report. The story traveled through the back alleys and the barrooms of the French Quarter. People remembered the man who never ate. They remembered his stories of Versailles. They connected the dots that the police were too terrified to map out. They realized that Jacques St. Germain hadn't just been an eccentric descendant of the Comte de Saint Germain. He was the Comte de Saint Germain himself. He had survived the collapse of the French monarchy, the changing of centuries, and the crossing of oceans by feeding on the one thing that time cannot decay, the life force of others. Today, 1041 Royal Street is a private residence. If you take a ghost tour through the French Quarter, the guide will inevitably stop beneath the second-story balcony. They will point up at the ironwork and tell you the story of the woman who leaped for her life. They will tell you that Jacques St. Germain is still out there, that every few decades a man matching his description, wealthy, impossibly charming, speaking half a dozen languages, appears in a new city, London, Paris, New York, Tokyo. He buys a house, he hosts parties, he never eats, and then a window breaks, a woman screams, and the cycle begins all over again. Is it just a story? A campfire tale told to tourists to extract a few dollars from their pockets? Perhaps. New Orleans runs on its legends the way an engine runs on fuel. 1041 Royal Street is a historic property located at the corner of Royal and Ursuline Streets in the French Quarter of the New Orleans. This beautiful townhome is widely featured on New Orleans vampire and ghost tours. Today, the nearly 5,000 square foot building stands as a highly photographed private multi-family residence with the primary resident as Chip Blondeau, who has lived in and cared for the historic property for years. There are no public museums or operational vampire lounges or active commercial businesses inside the structure. So, the next time you find yourself walking through the French Quarter late at night when the street lights flicker and the humidity clings to your skin like a wet shrub, listen closely to the footsteps behind you. If you hear the click of a silver-tipped cane against the cobblestones, do not turn around. Do not look into the eyes. And if he invites you to dinner, make sure you aren't the main course. This has been another episode of Bernette's Bizarre but True Tales. Thank you for listening. So, if tonight's tale left a chill at the back of your neck, then do not wander off, not just yet. Follow Bernette's Bizarre but True Tales. Wherever you listen, leave a rating or a review, if you dare, and share this episode with someone who thinks they are not afraid of the dark. Until next time, keep your lantern lit, question every shadow, and remember, the strangest stories are often the ones that were never meant to be told.